All right, well, why don't we start? Since you all are here and others who join will hopefully be able to catch up. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Really do appreciate it. And I'm honored that you have chosen to be here this evening as opposed to, I don't know, given the season, you could be out decorating with your holiday lights, I don't know, your garage or something, but instead you've chosen to be here. So, appreciate that. Happy Human Rights Day, actually. As you may know, it's the anniversary today of the passage of the Bill of Rights, which was passed on this day in 1791 when the state of Virginia became the first final state, actually, to ratify the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And you may recall that if you know your Bill of Rights, there is no mention in the Bill of Rights of corporate entities having any amount and number and degree of inalienable rights. Those were intended exclusively for human persons, though, as we know, it wasn't all human persons in the beginning that had inalienable rights, only white male property owners, but they were all eventually those that uh, gained those rights were human beings and not corporate entities. So anyway, let me make sure everyone has been entered. Yes. This program is focused on the cultural lessons from the U.S. movements for advancing move to amend and enacting the We the People Amendment for people who have come in late. Let me once more put in the chat this link that takes you to the actual article, which is the culmination of a year's worth of monthly pieces that I'll be making reference to as we go on. So let us begin. Just a few sort of housekeeping items at the moment. Everyone is muted. If you have any comments or questions um, going forward, and as I go on, feel free to put them in the chat. There'll be an opportunity to have comments and questions responded to. I really do plan to make this very brief from my end because I'm most interested and curious to hear your reactions, reflections, comments, queries, whatever the case may be related to this series. So I'm going to go very short and very briefly through this piece that tries again to summarize. And hopefully people have had an opportunity to scan, one or more of these movements that you have found of interest in particular, based on your personal interest or experience or knowledge or studies, whatever the case may be. But anyway, just wanted to provide a few introductory comments. And basically, starting with the social change. The history in this country has always required really both structural change, which are laws, institutions, and constitutional amendments, and cultural change, a shift in shared values, beliefs, identity, and collective consciousness. Law has always followed culture. We need both because transformative structural change has always involved both, but it has always been sparked, if you will, by changing sort of the narrative at the moment. So, beginning with that which people may believe is impossible, becoming over time possible, then over time becoming doable, and then over time becoming inevitable. If the culture is successful enough, wider, and deeper enough to transform people's thinking and actions, and translating those actions then into laws, if not into fundamental constitutional change. And so that is what this whole series has been about, of sort of the interplay and the importance and shining a light and a spotlight on the cultural side of the equation, because oftentimes we tend to think, I don't know, that somehow people and change happens automatically to the Constitution and the laws without understanding what went into it by people over time over many years, if not decades, if not even longer. So the cultural side of transformative change is extremely important to focus on. And that is what Move to Amend, our effort now coming up on nearly 16 years has been about. Certainly, it's been about trying to change the law, changing the Constitution by passing this amendment that would declare that a corporation is not a person and money is not speech. But we've always felt that, first of all, that the amendment is just one of many fundamental constitutional changes are needed, but that undergirding that and the base and root of it, or the core of it, really is we have to change the culture, change how people think and how they look at themselves and think about themselves, about democracy, and about who governs now, and who should govern. And so that's what it's really been all about from our end. As I say, I put a sort of a query in here that I claim no definitive expertise in any of these movements. I'm sure there may be people on this call who have spent a good number of years focusing on one or several of them that could pick a number of holes in any one of what I have shared. But it's based on, a combination of my readings and experiences in working with people who, have studied these movements, have been a part of some of them more recently, at least in the 60s anyway, it's maybe the most recent movement, or themselves who were studies and said, Greg, you should read this, look at this, follow this, or be part of a discussion group. So having said all of that, and mindful of these limitations, I just wanted to address a few important lessons learned from these 10 examined movements, which if you go to that piece, you'll see. I looked at the abolition movement of slavery, the women's and suffrage movement, the environmental movement, labor, the LGTBQ plus movement, that for the colonial revolution, the peace and anti-nuclear movement, the civil rights, the populist movement or agrarian movement of the 19th century, and direct election of senators. And in looking at them, I tried to somewhat connect them to the appropriate month of the year. That may or may not work, but I think to a certain extent, right? I mean, February is Black History Month, March, Women's History, April, the environmental movement. May, of course, is May Day. June is when Stonewall occurred. July 4th. August, Hiroshima. So that's where the peace anti-nuclear. October, only because the populists were farmers, and that, at least in many parts of the country, it's not a perfect match by any means, but that's when there is the harvest. And November is the direct election of senators. Well, that's November when we elect people. And what was left was September, so that's where the civil rights movement went in. So anyway, if you take nothing away from what I will share briefly here this evening or anything else, there's three things I hope that you will be able to remember or reflect upon, ponder upon, that as I go through this, I think are particularly important in going forward. And the very first one of them is the very first, and where I put it as number one, in looking at one of seven. And you could probably very easily come up with many different takeaways and lessons if you read each of these 10 movements and reflected on them and gave yourself some time to take some notes. Some of these may be the same, but others different. These were my seven. And the first one is, I think, absolutely essential and one that really transcended. Some of these, of course, were similar to many movements, if not all. But all of them, I felt, one of the absolute core or root important ones was this sense of human dignity, that successful social movements begin with people asserting their full humanity, even when and especially when the dominant culture denies it. And you can go through each of these, as I try to do, not all, but most of them, in giving examples of how each of people that were involved in these movements themselves and with the help of others affirmed their own dignity and respect and came to developing self-confidence to believe not just to sort of been told, but to believe in their hearts, their minds, their souls, that they have a fundamental and profound right to be involved in the decisions shaping their lives. That this was not going to be an exercise that they were going to leave to others, other experts, surrogates, those we elect to represent us, to do things for us. No, that they, people involved in these movements were going to directly be active participants in the shaping of the movement, good or bad, success or not. And this is just so important because, as history shows in many of these movements, showed there has always been an effort by the power elite, some of whom may have originally been revolutionaries, like those in the colonial revolution era, starting with somewhat outsiders, but once they get in, about the very first thing they do is try to slam the door behind them to make it extremely difficult for others to do what they did. And so they use a variety of techniques to do that, to prevent people from gaining the ability to be authentically empowered people. And so everything, they just basically try to do what they can to make people give a sense of their own inferiority, their inability, their powerlessness, and maybe most important, their resignation. You can't do anything about it. It's the end of history. The powers to be are too potent to do anything. So this has always been something that the narrative has pounded into us. Leave it to the experts. Let the public officials who you elect go to bat for you. So this is just so important. And Move to Med has always felt and has always been, hey, not been perfect by any means, but we've always tried and affirmed in the takeaways, two of them here in looking at this, uh, applied to Move to Mend, is that we've always tried to affirm the dignity and worth of individuals, that the Constitution is too damn important to be left to others to decide what should be in it. We the people weren't really part of the original one, to be sure. Only white male property owners, the elites of the day, um, and we haven't been a part of a good many others, though other people and in other times have driven themselves right into the Constitution, people of color and women. So we today should be driving ourselves into the Constitution, not just to pass the We the People Amendment, but to do many other things that we believe is important. So that's one of the takeaways. The other is, I think, very important, is that we need, in terms of culturally related to affirming our right to be in the Constitution and to shape the Constitution, to delegitimize and to use the culture to delegitimize the ideas that corporations deserve the same rights as people and that wealth and money equals free speech. And so we have been and tried to laser-like, been uncompromising in asserting that only human beings and not corporate entities should be part of We the People, and that money is wealth and not speech. So I give a lot of time to that because that's one of my three sort of ultimate takeaways. Some of these are sort of obvious, and I'm sure you would say, well, why do you even write it down? It's so apparent, but it's worth saying because so many of these movements, and what made them movements to the extent that they rose to the extent of being wide and deep in participation and achieving something anyway, maybe not as much as they would have liked or could have achieved maybe under better conditions, but nevertheless, we're able to because of so many of these other characteristics. Second one being broad grassroots solidarity is essential, right? You have to be broad and deep. You have to be inclusive. The labor movement built solidarity among workers who had previously been isolated. Populist movements had a certain degree of interracial alliance and so on. Civil rights movement involved Southern blacks, Northern Union members, people of faith, and students, and it goes on and on. And these movements succeeded because they built a shared identity rooted in a lived experience and collective power. Move to Mend has always been inclusive in believing that we are about not just passing an amendment, but that anchoring this sense of undemocracy, lack of democracy in this country is not only because of money has this inordinate influence in corporations or people, but because of oppression. historic oppression, people of color, women, many other people of different sexual orientation, different abilities, have not had inalienable rights and are still fighting for them to this day. And many of them that have been won through legislation and statute, we know are being taken away and threatened. So we have a statement of values that have affirmed, always affirmed, that across race and gender, class, sexuality, and ability, that we are included, are committed to inclusivity of all people who, quite honestly, have been on the short end of oppression and have been, the most victimized. So that's very important that we focus on that. And, related to this, also under this point of building solidarity, as, I tried to get into, is that, a basic organizing principle of organizing 101 is you got to start with people's interests and concerns, right? Starting with where people are, and Move to Amend has certainly tried to do that. Yeah, we focus a lot on, looking at the amendment from sort of a undemocratic place and a political corrupting place, but also from a place that the presence of the corruption of politics by the super duper rich and the hijacking of corporations of the Constitution has meant that the voices and choices and needs of we the people have not been met. Our voices have been shut out, which means our needs have not been met, our community's not helped, our natural world has been plundered. And so it's incredibly important to focus on addressing those felt, those needs that people believe government should acquire. But a second set of needs are the felt needs that by felt needs, meaning the basic sort of needs that sort of social service organizations provide, food, clothing, basic supplies that, some movements in the past have been much more conscious of doing, of trying to sort of be involved in social change and social service, sort of the combination of the two, as opposed to, having the volunteers working on the food kitchen side of the organization and then volunteers working on the social change side, and never the twain shall meet. When actually the more powerful, I think, and effective and threatening movements have been those that have combined the two. And I think we had Moved to Amend, I mean, most social change organizations don't really focus, right, on the social service side because of capacity, because of funding, but also because of, difficulty in having the actual time to do that and understanding that these two components go together. And so that is my second takeaway, is that focusing as we do and Move to Amend certainly is done, focusing on social change, in our case, trying to create an amendment, what is more changeable and far reaching than that, needs to be connected in some way to social service. And every movement, henceforth, going forward, needs to find a way to incorporate a social service dimension. You have groups now at a local level that are doing that. What do they call it? Mutual aid. That they're trying to change structure at a local level, maybe trying to change policy at a city council level, whatever. But they're also trying to raise money and providing, food or clothing or water or showing up and feeding people, sort of an ad hoc food in the town square, something like that. So it is incredibly important to sort of think about how to combine a social service dimension. Well, we can't feed, and plus we're a national organization. So one thing, although there are Move to Amenders that are involved in that kind of stuff, but organizationally, what we are thinking about doing and what we have started to do, as I've referenced in this piece, is focusing on a basic need right now that we think is very important, which is emotional support. I mean, given right now the poly crisis that we are facing in our country of dealing with, economic crisis, ecological, political, constitutional, social, people are paralyzed, people are depressed, people are angry, people are just unsure of what to do. So we have started and created this curriculum called the way through, from overwhelm, burnout, despair, and anger into effective action, as trying to fill that gap from a national perspective. And so you'll be hearing more about that. Third, the power of cultural expression moves people. And here, I'm sure you're familiar with, if you studied or seen films or documentaries about social movements in the past, the power that comes from cultural expressions, whether it is poetry or music or art or literature or storytelling. And there's plenty of examples. And I mean, you've seen those films and videos of the power of, we shall not be moved and we shall overcome. And I mean, the peace sign. And I mean, just so many ways of expressing oneself. And, in the labor movement, those visuals, those art forms, those forms of what were they, sort of uh, murals that you still see in post offices and in public buildings. I was at Cleveland Public Hall a couple days ago, and they're built 1922, and there are these incredible works of murals, just amazing. That just gives a feel for what it felt like to be a worker in that time. Anyway, very powerful. And it not only informs, but inspires. It's a way of communicating that touches the core of us in ways that just simply information, that a speech or a article or an investigative piece simply does not. Move to Amend has, begun to try to do that. We have something called our corporate rule stories, where people can write about anybody, including any of you, are invited to submit a story about how, from a first person, because the LGBTQ movement, how we have in this country sort of marriage equality is because queer people went about the business of telling their story, their personal story that touched people across the political spectrum. Storytelling, very important. And so we have this thing called corporate rule stories that allow people to do just that. And we also have created, going down, something called our creative resistance page. It's just starting. It's our own poetry and our songs, and some of you have, I think, maybe contributed to some of that. We have a variety of different kinds of literature and music and other sorts of things that we're trying to have that people can use, that people can incorporate in their events, that can be used to offset or to complement or supplement a talk you may give or something. So there's a link to that here. Very powerful. And we think, besides those sorts of things, in modern days, people are still doing that kind of storytelling and still writing and still doing poetry and all. But today, right, because of computers, we now do lots of visual things online. That's what memes are. That's what reels are. That's what stories and live streams are. And Move to Amend has got into that realm. We have a couple of co-directors, very active, and have produced some amazing pieces that, in fact, a couple of individual reels have attracted over 1 million individual reactions to it. So we're getting to that realm. We think it's very important. We will continue to do that, but we're also looking for that which would, as other movements in the past have found, what are called tipping points. Tipping points where after a while, that which is being, bubbling up and talking about reaches sort of a point where all of a sudden everybody knows about it. And with that, in today's reality, what are those kinds of people called influencers? People who are, the famous whoever, that can take what is already out there and by talking about them, just all of a sudden allows that message and that call and that demand to be heard. So anyway, that's what we're looking for in that regard. An entertainer, whomever, influencer, people, who may only be well known in the world of TikTok and, my Twit face and other mediums across the board. 4, nonviolent direct action, very important. When the powers to be refuse to respond to feeling, to sort of try to respond to them through the conventional ways, we have to make sure that they feel the heat. And sometimes you have to gum things up. And historically, certainly that has happened. The Underground Railroad, boycotts, illegal voting by people of color and women, and environmental blockades. The Boston Tea Party, tomorrow, by the way, anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. A Move to Men supporter told me she couldn't be on the program tonight, I think because tonight in Boston, they're doing the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. They're calling it the Boston Ice Tea Party. And they're going to be dropping in Boston Harbor huge blocks of ice to focus on ice. That is now doing today what sort of people of oppression, and certainly the British did back when, trying to oppress people and intimidate people and imprison people and all. So I thought that was very clever and a cool angle and take on Boston Tea Party. So anyway, this has been used, has it not? Very directly. Move to Men has not gotten much into nonviolent direct action. There's been individual incidents. We need to do that because going forth of, in addition to the many ways that you can try to stop harmful things from happening, people that literally put their bodies on the line or risk arrest appeals to people's moral conscience if it's done the right way and done in a type of way that allows for reflection and appeals to done not in anger, but in trying to allow people to reflect on what they're doing. And so there's some of that going on now with ICE agents and all. So anyway, Move to Men needs to be involved in all of that. And so that involves some training, that involves in commitment to people who are willing to do that in their communities. And we'll see. And it needs to be part of a larger strategy. Number 5, building and maintaining independent organization builds power and prevents co-optation. Extremely important. Movements, have not been in the past, in the present, nor in the future will ever be random individuals who just sort of show up. Sometimes it looks like they've just shown up, but they have been mobilized and organized. And sometimes when there has been elements of direct action, they have been trained before they show up. So they do conventional sort of protesting, but then they try to stop traffic or prevent people from going inside buildings or coming out of buildings. I was at the WTO back in Seattle in 1999, 2000, helped shut down that whole week's worth of stuff after the first day or two by people doing both legal actions, but also illegal actions and risking arrest. And so it's very important to have organizations there that provide the training, that provide the ability to organize people and train people and have people develop strategies and working on building movements. But it's extremely important, as we say, that those movements be independent, both political and economic. Because if you're not, if you're connected in some way or you're dependent in some way to the power elite, to the power structure, then you are at their beholden. And you cannot be independent. You cannot be radical. And by radical, we're talking about getting to the root of things. So extremely important to focus on becoming economically and politically independent so that you are not co-opted and that your message is not watered down. And you probably heard the terms, the women's movement being co-opted, the environmental movement being greenwashed, the Black Power movement or Black Lives Matter being blackwashed, and so many other washing of events, meaning they've been watered down by the funders that have said, yeah, we'll give you money to put on these amazing events, fund staff persons and all, but in exchange, you have to sort of agree to the Faustian bargain, whatever that may be, to temper your message, to call for acceptable change, but certainly that's not going to do one thing, and that's change or threaten the power structure. And that is what movements have to do that are truly politically and economically independent. Challenge the power structure so that we're the ones seated at the table. And I've always felt, and I've always had a problem with people who are out in the street saying, this is what democracy looks like. Okay, to a certain extent. But what real democracy looks like is when you're inside the building, not outside, inside the building, seated around the table and making the decisions that affect your lives, your community, and maintaining the natural world and expanding democracy for all. So avoiding co-optation by remaining politically and economically independent means, you got to rely on your supporters. Move to Men has done that, good or bad. Sometimes it's been bad when the money has been short and people have gone on furloughs and the like. But to make it long term, if we make it, we're going to have to stay politically and economically independent as every movement that has been successful, both in the past and going forward, have been to the extent that they have been. Sixth, reforms are not enough. Structural change is essential to confront corporate power and plutocracy and beyond. Many of these movements focused, their victory because they were damn hard to even get legislative action. Think about the civil rights movement. It was, in a sense, unbelievably difficult just to pass the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Act, which of course both of which are under assault now because they were legislative changes and not constitutional changes. Many of these other movements did focus on trying to change the rules of the game. That's what constitutions are, that undergird or overarch really laws and who we elect. And it's important to elect better people, important to have better laws, important to have better regulations, important to have better executive decisions. But it's super important and most important to have the rules of the game democratic and wide and deep so that we have the power to decide fundamentally how the system is going to work on our behalf. And so that's why many of these movements focused on constitutional changes, some successfully, some not so, and some partially. Certainly the efforts at gay rights, marriage, was only part of what trans people wanted, which was to protect trans people constitutionally, which didn't happen. And now they are under assault, as many other people are who don't have inalienable constitutional rights. Never mind economic rights, or should be rights, that are mere laws, healthcare, and so many other things that others have said, and in other places are more grounded and rooted, and many people are talking about should be constitutionally protected. So Move to Amend obviously is focused on and will continue to focus on constitutional change, but we are increasingly realizing that constitutional change by itself may not be enough. We need to work with others to transform the Constitution beyond even the Move to Amend amendment. And so third, or I should say number 7, is following the sequential recipe to build a powerful movement on fundamental change. And this one may be sort of hard to grasp, but this is my third sort of important takeaway. And sorry for going so long, but trying to get all this together in a short amount of time, a year's worth. Apologies for going over the sequence. And I take this from the Populists. Other movements did this. I don't know to what extent knowingly they did it, not as successfully at what the Populists knowingly tried to do, came somewhat close to doing, but both internally and externally, the stars weren't quite right, lined up correctly. By sequence, what at least Lawrence Goodwin, who wrote and analyzed the populist movement, tried to analyze what the populists did. And these were farmers, again, a movement that most people weren't all aware of. I didn't study this in school. Most people don't. And I think it's largely because this was a movement that was really trying to threaten fundamental. I mean, obviously, so did the Colonial Revolution threaten and did change, right? They overruled and overturned and revolted against the king. But other than that, the populists, in trying to get rid of the corporate state and in its place, put in a political democracy, but also an economic democracy through cooperatives. But anyway, they developed this sequence in which you basically needed to have 4 different elements present to create a powerful movement. And they had to come in this order of creating powerful organization. So movement, organization, followed by movement recruitment, followed by movement education, followed by movement politicalization. Those 4 things. And they needed to think of it, the organization is the basement, the foundation. The recruitment is sort of the first floor, the education, second floor, and the politicalization, political action, top floor. And each one, it was absolutely essential that each one be completely strong because it had to hold up all these other ones. And they were all based on being powerful and effective in doing what they were designed to do. To be a powerful organization, you had to have the capacity and independence, of course, to be able to bring in and to recruit millions of people. Because to have a successful movement, you need to recruit millions of people. And that's what the Populists did. Their recruitment tool in meeting an immediate need was saying, hey, you farmers, poor farmers that can't and have not been able to sort of get a fair wage for whatever you're growing individually, come together. And we're going to form a union. It's going to be an economic cooperative. We're going to form a cooperative, all these cooperative stores, and we're going to sell our stuff together like a union. When labor people come together and negotiate and bargain as a union with employer. That's what these uh, cooperatives were. And so that was that. And to the extent that you had these millions of people in the door, now you had a base, what are you going to do with them? Yeah, you want them, of course, to sort of learn to trade one another, but they needed to be politicized. You need to educate them. And that's what the populists did. They had hundreds, if not thousands, of people who went around the back of, of wagons to talk about the political system and the economic system to get them on the other side of the learning curve. And they developed an awareness of monetary reform that was second to none, basically, even up to the present time, basically. So that's the education. And then, okay, is it enough to educate? No, we need to politicize it. We need to transform that. We need now to try to take action. And they did that. They developed their own political party, the People's Party. They developed their own platform, the Populist platform, the Omaha platform of 1892. It's a revolutionary document. They tried to, and were successful to a certain extent, at electing officials, representatives, senators, and the like. But the Faustian bargain they made, that was their downfall, is they decided in 1896 to fuse with with the Democratic Party and get behind William Jennings Bryan, and that was the death knell. There were some weaknesses prior to that as well, but we can get into that. People are interested. So anyway, that's the third takeaway, and that's it. I mean, there's some concluding statements, but I've gone on long enough. So sorry for going on so long. At this point, again, appreciate so much you being here and totally open to your questions, comments, queries. I will, at this point now, for the very first time, look at the chat, and if someone, I don't know, can help me go through that, or if you want to raise your hand, you can do that either by raising your physical hand. I will call on you, or your chat iconic hand at the bottom, and um, I will try to call on you. Oh, somebody knows about the ice party. Cool. Mark, unmute yourself.
What- Yeah, did I put up my hand? I did have a question, but I didn't think I put up my hand. But okay, can you hear me?
Oh, I had called on a different Mark.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'll get to you,
that's all
Mark.
right.
The other Mark.
Okay, okay, Greg.
There you go,
I
Mark
got
Harmon.
myself unmuted there.
Got you.
Sorry. Um, I really like this presentation of what you've done, and I just wanted to reflect to you that in my former life, I have been in the past involved with a multi-level marketing organization that was extremely effective. And one of the things, as you talk with regard to education, they were basically trying to do similar things to what we are trying to do.
Mhm.
But just from learning process from them, they put together like a training manual that looked almost like a graphic novel or something. It was just full peppered with
Mm.
the fundamentals of what we were trying to accomplish and the steps we had to use to achieve our goals and so forth.
Mhm.
I think it would be, it would be great. I don't know who would be able to put something together, but it wasn't super, polished or at all. But it achieved what it set out to do and basically communicated the message like you're doing tonight only it did it in a way that people could take it home and crack it open piece by piece and get down to the nitty gritty of it. And I was just thinking that would be a wonderful tool for us if we had something that we could use within our organizations. The other part of it was that they were working uh, constantly, having meetings like you're doing tonight, like the national does, but the local groups were broken into units where they were constantly educating it, and at least once a week, sometimes more than once a week, they were inviting people in, with new recruits, help them understand what this was all about, how they could get involved. Anyway, I think there's a lot to learn from the people that have really mastered multi-level marketing. Anyway, with that, I'll pause and let you respond.
Yeah, no, I
Thanks.
think there's so much that we can learn from so many people. That's true. And your comments just sort of triggered in a couple of the monthly pieces where I talked about education. I referenced, which I didn't in the summary. There was just so much. Is Move to Men, and maybe Move to Men co-director could put in the chat the link to our in-depth, both wide and deep effort at trying to get people to understand movements and understand how to organize and all. It's called a movement education program. And it's pretty extensive. It can be somewhat daunting, but it does a little bit maybe about what it is you're referring to. But yep. Okay, the other Mark, and then we'll go to Marcia. So Mark, unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, Greg, thanks for this presentation. So I'm really grabbing onto, I like this phrase, delegitimizing the idea that corporations have the rights of people.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm struggling to understand how we get people passionate about that. Many people probably don't know the real impact that powerful corporations have on their lives. It's a chain of events they have to follow to realize that we get shortchanged. And then other people that do, just feel like perhaps it's overwhelming and can't be, we can't shift the dynamics. So do you have any thoughts on either of those?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a challenge, and a lot of that has to do with a guy named. What occurs to me is it reminds me of a guy. I used to be involved in this organization called the Program on Corporations, Law and Democracy, or POCLAD, and it was co-founded by a guy named Richard Grossman, who ended up referencing this term all the time: fish discover, water last. If you think about it, if you're in the water, you're surrounded by water, guess what's around you? Water, and you're a fish. You know nothing more than water. We know nothing more than the corporate culture that is all around us, unless you go somewhere, unless you go to Cuba or China, although a lot of them are going corporate. But you have to get outside of the water to understand it. Now, if you're
Yeah, I like that.
physically, yeah, if you're physically there, then the only way to sort of escape is you've got to, be immersed in a space for a certain period of time. It can be a workshop that's a couple of hours where, you come and you have some exercise, that's a centering exercise, meditation, where you just forget about all the busy stuff, all the things that we're expected to do to maintain our consumer cult, all of that stuff, to just try to flush away, to sort of for those period, couple of hours, to unlearn what's been indoctrinated in us, and then, get a little bit of history of how we got into this fix and to just try to reorient. I mean, there's no one way to do it, but it is a challenge because we are stuck in this. We are immersed in it. And so just understanding that, that if you can just internalize that fact, you are already ahead of 90% of the people, although it's becoming less. The whole corporate thing is becoming less, and younger people are becoming much more aware of how the powers to be and the power of advertising and the power of manipulation through the media and the power of electronic media is using to manipulate. that is becoming more aware. So all that's to the good.
All right. Thanks.
Marcia, unmute yourself. And thanks, Cole, for putting in the chat. So the movement.
I'm
Yep.
working on it, but anyhow, it's just going to take too long. So anyhow, again, given that money really is an urgent and I think underlying issue that has put us at our tipping point or close to doing that, I'm wondering if it's the difficulty with constitutional change. And, I mean, its history is not one of great, success. The process can take, many, many years. So I've been reading about this Overton window. Not sure if you saw that, but it looks at the political viability of an idea and whether it falls into an acceptability range rather than waiting for politicians to advocate for it. It sort of frames this range of policies.
Mm-hmm.
And a politician may recommend them once they become less extreme. So I'm wondering if aligning with something with other states or even like the Montana plan even though that does not remove all corporate constitutional rights, is that a step in the right direction where you can, align with other states to not to regulate corporations, to not allow them to use money and send clearly a signal that if we aren't at a tipping point, by then that surely would do it. Is that something that, by working with other, I don't know, states, or I don't know how, I just read about and listened to the program the other day about the Montana plan, and the Atlantic has some good stuff on it. Wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, Move to Men is, and if some Move to Men co-director could put in the chat the recent piece we just put together, sort of our
great
alignment and support of the Montana plan, our read on it, to the extent, you're right, it doesn't go as far, but it is, we think, a stepping stone that provides for people an opportunity to learn, to get on the other side of the learning curve, if nothing else, about corporate charters and how corporate charters were initially meant to be subordinate and defining and limiting based on people, we the people, and those we elect to define what companies could and could not do, one company at a time, and later through the industry, each sector, railroads, utilities, whatever, had their own separate charter. So the Montana plan this is a plan, by the way, that is being initiated in the state of Montana, trying to get on the ballot an effort that would redefine the corporate charter as saying they no longer have the power to collect money, corporations to collect money for elections. If you don't have the power to do so, then of course you can't have the rights. The right to do something becomes moot if you don't have the power to do something. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to come up with enough signatures. So we do support that as a stepping stone. We support the Move to Amend people in Montana who are working on it, and invite people to sort of come together. And we will in 2026 be doing and sharing some information and encouraging people to come together, and maybe developing some, I don't know, questions or something where people can come together and ask one another questions, get into a discussion, and try to learn more about it. At the very least, if not begin to explore what they want to do. But you're right about this, trying to move the Overton window. That's sort of a term, Overton window, to define how people need to change the culture, to make something that is currently not being seen get in front of the window, so now you can see it. You now become aware of it. So that's what Move to Men's trying to do.
Thank
Yes,
you, Greg.
Eric, good to see you.
Good to be here, and thank you for your presentation. I want to make just two fairly brief points and then ask one pointed question. William Jennings Bryan was a Methodist, and that style of organization and faith was what led in many ways to the undermining of the populist movement. Because it did not have the rough edges, it did not have the independence, it did not have the cooperative nature of the Baptists or the Campbellite Christians, who were together the major portion of that movement. The other one is in Ithaca, New York State Legislature in the 1980s passed a loophole for providing health care. And one of the reasons why Tompkins County and Ithaca came strong, the towns of Danby and Caroline came early into this, is that we had a practice locally of organizing around that loophole. The state of New York allowed any taxing municipality to form a cooperative to provide health care. That cooperative would then collect the premiums and pay them out, and they would contract with a major health like Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield to do the computer management of it. That cut the cost of healthcare for these municipalities by 30%, putting it in the range close to European healthcare and putting it just a couple of percentage points above Medicare. So with that kind of innovation, if we can find innovation that work at the lower level, why not pursue that wherever it happens? And I'm asking the question, the plan you have described sounds like a religious movement in its every step of its structures. And that will ossify itself and become self-absorbed, is my fear. How can you take your plan and prevent that outcome?
Well, I should say first off, well, thanks for all of that. Appreciate communicating with you over the last few weeks or month or so. Religion and people of faith have played an extremely important role
Sure.
in many of the movements that have been identified that have assumed a space to the extent that it has without sort of completely taking it over. Although the civil rights movement was pretty heavily religious from the Southern.
Right, and failed because it didn't ground its work deeply enough.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of I think there are a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
A lot of reasons for it, but I don't necessarily think that this, it's not my plan after all.
Okay.
These sort of four stages. I don't necessarily think it has to be sort of based on faith or religion. I think it can be one.
I'm not making that claim. I'm
Oh, I'm
saying
sorry.
the structure of your development looks like a religious structure. So without even talking about faith, it looks like you're going to have an outcome that is around standardized education, membership, building a powerful force to change society, like Salvation Army or any of these other major religious movements that we've had, or the civil rights movement, and they collapse in kind of predictable ways. How can you avoid that outcome?
Well, it's a good question. There has not been ever. I mean, the populists came about as close as any in sort of having these four layers and being, sort of completely built out and built down, but they failed because the powers to be sort of took out refused to negotiate with the cooperatives. They were that powerful.
And they refused to engage in the force that it would have taken to be negotiated with.
That's right. So I think, I'm not necessarily worried that if there is a successful movement these days, there is no one organization or even small number of organizations. You have 1,000 organizations. I mean, just look at the environmental movement, 10,000 organizations. So a single one, it's going to be pretty difficult to have a movement. It's going to be more like a movement of movements these days. And I think that by definition will mean it's very diverse, both in terms of its ability to effectively build out organization of recruiting. There'll be a lot of different ways of recruiting new people in. Uh, each movement or movement of movements will have that if we achieve that and are successful. And once in, the education will equally be diverse.
Okay, but how does that settle the problem? You identified they didn't have the power to force down the other powers. They didn't assume taking those levels of risks and creating that level of disruption. How will this movement be prepared to do, in some ways, the unthinkable, the almost immoral act that will take to push through a successful effort?
Well, I mean, it's going to have to be what the populists were not, which was independent. I mean, you're going to have a politicalization. You're going to have, first of all, you're going to have your ability of recruiting people to be not dependent on the power structure in any way. So you're going to have to provide some way of meeting tangible needs that is totally funded, totally supported internally without any external dependency. You know, when I visited India back in the early 90s and studied the Gandhian movement and spent a lot of time with Gandhians and a lot of people that are working on social change, the individual organizers who did that, what limits the ability to do some of that here is 501c3s, 501c4s, and the like, in which, oh, you can't do a business and work on social change if you want to get exempt tax deductible contributions. They have
Unless
no
you're an S
concept.
corp.
They have no concept of that. So
Right.
the organizers that I was with, when we would go and meet with a lot of students, a lot of people, they had a whole cart full of stuff they were selling to the same people they were talking to, who were purchasing those items that they then wore, soap and personal items and scents and all sorts of things, clothing and the like. So that it's going to have to be sort of funded internally without connection. And then once that, you have then education that goes on, that is, radical education that you develop and then politicized. That's the tough one because, there have not been very many successful third parties. There have been, Republican Party was a third party. But, at some point, but look around right now, the two parties are losing credibility by the boatload. And so it's not inconceivable that under the right circumstance, but it's going to have to, all these stars are going to have to line up. It's hard. The populist movement of the 19th century and the labor movement of the early 20th century missed one another by about 10 or 20 years because the rise of the populists just sort of, they declined just as the labor movement in the urban areas, rose up. If they had sort of come together, I think we might have had it, or they may have had it. Anyway, just pure speculation. Other questions or queries? I know we're at an hour and I said we go an hour, but I'm willing to stick around at least 15 more minutes if people want to cuss or discuss anything. So totally open. And I'm sorry if I have missed anything in the chat. I see Lynn has put something in here about non-public banks and all that. Yeah, money creation. Anyone else? Okay. Give it one more go. Go ahead, Lynn. How are you?
Hello, thank you. Yes, I wanted to make sure that people would read through my chats, the information I'm sharing. And the Vatican Nation has 80 trillion just in banks, and all the churches have a lot of money and a lot of properties that they took from the indigenous cultures worldwide, as we know now. And they have lots of arts and gold, and they must unite to shift all the monies, all media, and all education systems to caring jobs, not killing, not warring, not stealing, not robbing, not human trafficking, not ICE. They've got to stop the wars and drug wars that are causing all the immigration problems worldwide. Set up new education systems. So it's kind of in my uh, the petition I was guided to put on. The petition is on change. I'm an Oregon change agent certificate, 3-time Oregon governor, medical doctor. I've been studying alternative healing since 1975. Big Pharma has left out every alternative healing, that modality, since 1939, overrode them. And they started Big Pharma that took over the Vatican. And actually Big Pharma, to hear this is really critical, because Big Pharma, Bayer bought Auschwitz. Bayer bought the property for Hitler. And after Operation Paperclip, and not too many years ago, we ended up with, what? FDA, AMA, Bayer, Monsanto merger, okay? We really have to get to the history of man-made drugs versus poppies and cocoa leaves, 3,000 ancient plant medicines, the doctor's book of food remedies, the doctor's book of home remedies. We need healing for humans, clean air, clean water, clean food, and the Love is Medicine Project, love. These elite right now are going after robotic citizens like Sophia. It's so dangerous what we're up against. And, chemical aerial sprays, they're hiding weatherization weapon systems since 1952. They don't talk about. Okay. So anyway, go to my petition, change agent, go to change.org, legislation, CARES Act, pay people to care, stop warfare systems. And it goes into different systems of green civil service programs, and Marianne Williamson ties in with her work now too, with housing, not handcuffs.com. She worked with a fellow doing that. And then also to Greg Braden's work. We're made in the image of God. We're supposed to be, one nation under God. That's a God within each other. That's the sole purpose of each person. That's the always caring. It's always good. Okay. One nation under God to one world under God, not under guns and drugs and war and these elite. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your comments your comments sort of triggered, ultimately, kind of going back to Eric's question and comment is, during the 60s, people, quote unquote, dropped out, right? They said, no, I'm not going to be part of this system. And they created sort of alternative communities. And ultimately, we have to drop out of the corporate system. Some people do to some extent, but how can we do it? And, sort of to the extent of it's convenient. But at some point, it's going to have to be more conscious and deliberate.
Greg, it is.
It's out of those kinds of communities that will form.
Yes.
That will.
.org. And our library system started civicaction.org, Civic Shout. They're here to help all this happen, all of the systems change, education.
Got it.
And there's interfaith hand-to-hand schools that actually were started by different teachers in the U.S. and in inside of Israel, saying this is crazy, this is awful. We can't keep teaching, our kids. I mean, Israel, how long have they been then having their kids, males and females, mandatory draft? Mandatory for what, 40, decades or what? I mean, come on. We got to stop teaching more, okay?
Yep. And a lot of other things.
Caring jobs, okay? And the NIB, the National Infrastructure Bankers Group, they are so awesome. They're ex-bankers saying, Okay, so I put their information in there. They're here to help set up new banking systems to help us.
Thank you. All right, one more, Michael, and then we're going to close it up. Michael, greetings.
Greetings. As you know, I'm not much into organizing these days, but I am in action. And I have two questions that have been concerning me for the last few weeks, as probably you know from my communications with you. The number one is we work every term to get representatives to sign on and be sponsors to Move to Amend. And this year I did a search and discovered that only 2 of the, I think it's 67 sponsors have ever done anything that is visible to encourage people to be interested in Move to Amend, and that is Pramila Jayapal, and I can never remember the abbreviation of the young lady who's had an Instagram, and nobody else who sponsors this has come out in favor of it in any visible form that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what
Yeah.
I discovered in my research. And the second question I have is that, as you also know, we went through a process a few weeks ago of asking all 500 and something thousand supporters of Move to Amend to suggest to us a person who is visible, as you say, an influencer, who is or could be brought to vocally supporting Move to Amend. That includes all the talking heads and podcasters and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I have not yet heard anything that suggests that is happening. Because as you well know, your finding was a few months ago that in the world of organizations seeking to make change, we are basically invisible. And how many years has it been that we've been trying to reach the 600,000 level, which is something and hasn't happened yet? And yet we continue our local movements, and the things get worse in the population, in the country. The horrors that are coming to us from our administration just multiply. Why are we not visible? How can we become visible? And what do we need to do? And how can we persuade our supporters, our sponsors, to take on the responsibility that they seem to have assumed they have by being sponsors to help make this happen?
Yep.
Those are my concerns.
Yep. Good concerns. I'll answer the first one and I'll have Katie answer the second. First one about the existing, we're now at 68 co-sponsors and only, you say two have given comments. One of our proposed goals next year is to focus on that very thing, is to get people who are already supported to go back to them and say, hey, what's going on? It's not enough to just put your name on this, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to say about it? And why that's important is because in 2025, we've seen it sort of an explosion of awareness of people believing that corporate power is even more than in most years, is out of control and needs to be reined in. So a lot of these Congress people even have a little more cover than they otherwise would. I mean, they don't have much backbone to begin with, but there's an opportunity to do that. And so we're going to try to take advantage of it. So that's a response to the first part. Katie, you want to respond to the second?
Yeah, I was going to say we just got back from a big gathering of influencers in DC for the Rage Against or Remove the Regime. Um, and we made a lot of great contacts. I'm going to drop a doc in the um, chat of a lot of people that we talked to. And we really tried to make the connection that, yes, our article of impeachment need to happen, but what's the point in removing a few bad apples if we don't have systemic change? And we were all over the place with that. So I think along with like some of our reels getting just massive amount of attention, getting our messaging to these influencers is a huge project of mine and the rest of the team, because it's not that people don't support it. It's not enough people know about it. And we're still definitely in the people power building part of this whole process. But I feel like that this whole, especially next year with the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, there's so much more talk and focus and energy going to what is happening, what's happening to our democracy. So I think we're going to see a huge, and like last month alone, we had more petition signers than we've ever had. So we're seeing a surge of energy on this end. It's still a marathon, it's not a sprint, as I was told from the very beginning. But the tides are changing and we just got to stay on it. So, and like I said, I dropped the link in the doc. All those people have millions of followers and we had personal connections with them. The follow-up has got to happen, but they were already starting to share our stories here and there. But we haven't, it's the end of the year, fundraising, all that stuff that's really going to set the tone for next year. So the follow-up hasn't happened as much as it's going to happen the first of the year. So I think we'll see a big change in our visibility on social media.
Yep.
Everyone loved us. They loved
Yep,
us.
that's true.
They were happy to hear systemic change. They were happy to hear solutions, not just griping about something. A plan in place, a organization that's been working their butts off all this time. Excuse my language, but so.
Lots of groups out there that are opposing, particularly this year, and that needs to happen. But we are about proposing, and that is sort of refreshing, particularly because the proposition that we're calling for is fundamental and systemic. So, on that note, hey, appreciate all of you in having weighed in very much in the spirit of what we have just said. It is end of the year fundraising. If any of you want to share a Bitcoin or two with us, we certainly would be happy to accept it. Help us out. Go to movetomen.org/donate. And, 2025, sort of the main theme we made to try to make the connection was that authoritarian rule and corporate rule is sort of two sides of the same coin, undemocratic coin. And in 2026, because it's the 250th anniversary, we're going to be talking about how, we need a declaration of independence from corporate rule, which we haven't really had. So I will just end with who was it? Who was it that said that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come? I think it was Victor Hugo. And we think that this idea, not just the We the People Amendment, but really many other amendments are necessary because we are finding out increasingly from supporters as well as from others who are frustrated with the lack of real democracy because of the Constitution itself, that we need to think about the Constitution writ large that goes even beyond the We the People Amendment. And so in 2026, part of our call and part of what we will be doing is reaching out to organizations and influencers, people in podcasts and all, who are recognizing that constitutional renewal, yes, should include the We the People Amendment, but also a lot more. So with that, thank you so much. Feel free to share the information, the links near and far, and do, again, appreciate your participation. Thanks so much. Appreciate your support and interest. Bye now.